Sometimes we deny that we're acquainted with those kinds of things in the church. And unfortunately, then we cause our brothers and sisters in Christ who have mental illness disorders to suffer in silence. People in the church say, well, mental illness is just a weakness or it's a character flaw. People say, well, if you have enough faith or if you pray hard enough, then you won't have a mental illness. And I
Wow.
say, look, my brain serotonin level and my faith don't have anything to do with each other. People that have mental illness really are bad Christians. And
Uh,
that's the problem, is that you're just a bad Christian. And I would challenge that we're all bad Christians. God created us to be in community,
yes.
right? I mean, God did not create us to be alone. What we need to think about in the church is, what is it like to live in the mind with
Mm.
someone with a brain disorder?
You're listening to the Visibly Fit podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Wendie Pett, and every week I'll give you holistic, practical solutions for everyday issues related to nutrition, healing, functional fitness, and behavior modifications. As a naturopath, fitness expert, and wellness coach for over 20 years, my goal is to empower you to reach for greater health and to rise up to your next level of living in mind, body, and spirit. You were created with greatness in mind. It's time to own it. Are you with me? Then let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Visibly Fit podcast. I'm your host, Wendie Pett. You know, Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." I love that scripture verse. I love all of Philippians. Philippians 4:13 is my life verse, but I love all of Philippians. But I bring that up because, being visibly fit is about being fit mind, body, and spirit. And when I say mind, I want to talk about just the aspect of the mind, the mental health aspect of the mind, and where we are currently in this country, in this world, as it pertains to our health and our well-being mentally. And so, sometimes there can be some stigmas around mental health, and um, 1 in 5 people in the church over the age of 18 are dealing with some sort of mental health illness. And so we need to be aware and have compassion and have an understanding of what mental health really is, how to spot it, how to nurture somebody that has it, if we're called to nurture them and to love on them and to help restore them, instead of just shoving them aside like they're weird or they've got, an illness and I don't know how to handle it, so I'm just going to not talk to them. That's not cool. That's not good. We need to figure out how to get educated enough to bridge the gap, right? And to make sure that they know that they have community. Okay. So I have a wonderful guest on with me today. His name is Dr. Allan Gates, and he's from Broken Bow, Oklahoma. That's right, Oklahoma. So we were talking before the show about, because I grew up in Texas, so Texas OU games, he would be our big rival. He's out of actually Tulsa, Broken Bow area. Anyway, he is just a wealth of knowledge. He is fun to chat with, and he has an incredible resume here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but he is one of the largest psychiatric hospital and clinics in the United States. He's been a clinical director for one. And he was the director at some inpatient psychiatric programs, substance abuse programs, mental health intensive outpatient programs, outpatient psychiatric clinics. He's done lots of training of campus pastors and mental health issues, which is great. He has worked done marriage conferences, pastors conferences. He's just a wealth of knowledge, and he's written 2 books, one called The Road to Recovery, and the other one is called Where's God? And so I'm super excited to have him on today, because he's just, again, fun to talk with, but he's going to help you get a better understanding about mental health issues and how you can step up in maybe your family or even in your church community to help those around you that might be dealing with their own mental health issues, or maybe you're dealing with mental health issues and you're looking for someone to assist you. He's your guy. So anyway, enjoy this show. Well, welcome, Dr. Allan Gates, to the Visibly Fit podcast. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you
Yes.
having me on.
Oh, I appreciate you saying I appreciate you, because that little accent makes me feel right at home. I know you're from Oklahoma. I'm from Texas, but there's a similar accent, so I love it.
Right. So you're the one with the accent, not me. So
Oh, okay. I see. That's good. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Sure.
And I know before the conversation started, you said, just call me Allan. I'm like, yeah, just call me Wendie. So this is
Please.
really casual. But, I feel like we can't stress and talk enough about mental health these days. And that's your area of expertise, and you're
Mhm.
passionate about helping people and helping people in the church
Yes.
get freed up of the stigma that goes around mental health. So let's just kind of dive in immediately to talk about kind of the main areas of mental health that you have been working with, and
Mhm.
we can kind of unpack it from there.
Sure. So my focus is depression and anxiety and bipolar and marital problems and things that we are all very much acquainted in the church. Sometimes we deny that we're acquainted with those kinds of things in the church. And unfortunately, then we cause our brothers and sisters in Christ who have mental illness disorders to suffer in silence.
Mm,
And that's not what God's called us to do, Wendie.
mm-mm.
God has called us, and I think probably three areas. First is certainly to reveal Christ to believers and to unbelievers and to move us forward in our spiritual lives. Secondly, God's called us to relieve suffering, and we do that through social programs, and we do that through different support groups that we have and different things that we have in and outside the church. And then third, Wendie, we need to be involved as a church in restoring people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And when people that have mental illness come back from treatment or are in need of treatment, we need to, as a church, get involved. And quite frankly, we don't do that because folks with mental illness are messy people. I mean, it's a mess to try to help folks and to get them help, and quite frankly, to be involved with them.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know that someone has mental health issues until you're kind of uh, in the weeds, so to speak, with that friendship or that relationship, and it can be tough to maneuver through. And so there almost needs to be some. I mean, that's one of the reasons I have you on, some education around those that don't have mental health issues, so that we would know how to have compassion and understanding, and the right words and actions to help our brothers and sisters out.
Sure, and there are tremendous myths in our congregations about what mental illness is, and unfortunately, I've heard them all, and hopefully, am on some of the front lines in terms of helping people combat some of the myths. But some of the most common myths are that people in the church say, "Well, mental illness is just a weakness." Or it's a character flaw. And I try
Mm,
to explain to them that it is a brain disorder,
right.
and hopefully we'll get into some of that information today. And then secondly, people say, well, if you have enough faith or if you pray hard enough, then you won't have a mental illness. And I
Wow.
say, look, my brain serotonin level and my faith don't have anything to do with each other.
That's right. That's right.
And then, Wendie, I've also heard that people that have mental illness really are bad Christians. And
Uh,
that's the problem, is that you're just a bad Christian. And I would challenge that we're all bad Christians. Wouldn't you?
isn't
Wouldn't
that
you
the
say
truth?
that? Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I point to people like King David,
Right.
who definitely expressed some mental illness. Talk about C.S. Lewis, who we certainly would say was a good Christian, but yet talked about his mental pain. And C.H. Spurgeon would
Mm,
preach on depression from the pulpit.
yeah.
So, when some of our great Christians of faith and leaders have definitely dealt with their own personal issues. Gosh, I think about Rick Warren, right, at Saddleback Church.
Right.
His
Yeah.
son Matthew
Hmm.
commits suicide,
Right.
and certainly Matthew had access to the best therapists, the best medications, and sometimes the darkness, unfortunately, just overwhelms people in their depressions.
Yeah, it's so true, Alan, because I did an episode not too long ago, and I actually spoke at a chiropractic event not too long ago about the epidemic of loneliness, and that's that isolation and the mental health um, kind of space. It really puts people in that loneliness
Yeah,
place, and it
yeah,
it feels dark. It's not a fun place to be. And since the epidemic and all kinds of things that went on, it put more and more people into a cocoon, if you will. And they're some people are really trying to work their way out, and they need people to help them do that. They can't do it
that's right.
alone, right?
That's right. That's right. God created us to be in community,
Yes.
right? I mean, God did not create us to be alone. The book of Genesis talks about the fact that what was the first thing God said was not good? That
For
man
man to
was
be
alone,
alone.
right? And I'm
Mhm.
sure that you've spoken on that issue and looked at that. And so God created another human, and then God created community, and God created the church, and that's where the ministry needs to be to people.
Right, that's it. And it is, it's messy, and it's tough sometimes, but man,
Mhm.
that is really where we all grow as individuals and become more Christ-like, is when we're with people.
Yeah,
Because it's like it is messy, but God in us and his strength and his wisdom can help us maneuver the situations, and he's the ultimate physician and healer in all things.
that's right.
So we can lean on him. But I want to go to the mental health stuff because
Sure.
as a holistic practitioner, right?
Yeah,
I'm all about, okay, let's check your vitamin D levels, right? Because
right.
that's a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to mental health issues. Let's check how is your sleep? How's your stress? How are you eating? Are you moving? I mean, there's so much to it that can change the dynamic of the physical situation, and also the mental, the neurotransmitters that are causing the mental illness to begin with. So let's talk about that first, and then
Yep.
kind of dive into kind of what you prescribe to your patients, or kind of your steps that you take.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, one of the things that I've heard you say is that your body is a gym, right?
Yes,
So if your body is a gym, I would say our mind is the swimming pool in the gym,
there you go.
right?
It's good. I
Because
like that.
we're constantly, particularly in Oklahoma, we're constantly having to add water to the swimming pool. Where we're in the sunlight swimming pool, we're having to rake the leaves and making sure that we're taking care of all the gunk that goes in our swimming pools. And so we're constantly having to feed our minds. We're constantly having to take care of our minds in the gym, in
That's
that
good.
gym
That's
that
good.
God has created for our
Hold every
body,
thought
right?
captive. Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, another thing I've heard you say is when you're talking about your mom, and one of the things you said was what it was like to live in that body, right?
Mm. Mhm.
And so I would say what we need to think about in the church is what is it like to live in the mind with
Mm.
someone with a brain disorder?
Yeah, that's good.
And we think of in our field, we think of this whole thing of mental illness maybe being in three or four categories. And do you mind if we kind of unroll those
Let's
pieces? Would that
please,
be
please,
helpful?
let's do. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that we would say, or that we know, is mental illness can be a piece that's passed on from person to person. And so we know those genes or the genetic or the hereditary pieces are those things that make us what we are, how we look, how we act, how we think. So we know there's probably some genetic component to mental illness. And what I'm trying to do is to convince people in the church that we need to see it as a brain disorder, because that's how we're going to be able to help people, versus just telling them to suck it up or to get over it or pray harder or give more tithe money, or I know my pastor would like to hear more of that, but
Oh goodness.
doing things like that, right? So
Well,
one of the things we
uh,
know.
interjecting on the genetic
Yeah,
piece, I
yeah,
just want to encourage people, because there's this thing called epigenetics, and you can
yeah,
change the gene receptors, how they turn on and off,
right,
based on how you are living your life. And so we can
absolutely,
touch on that too. So it's not like my uncle, my mom's brother, was
yeah,
schizophrenic. Okay.
yeah,
So I
okay,
do understand the mental health disorders and illness as it pertains to that, and some depression in my family. Like I get it.
yeah.
But it doesn't have to be someone's, you know, the stamp on their life, right?
Of course not, and that's what we see, and that's what we are shooting for, is change in
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
So we have the biological component, and not everybody has the biological component. So that's part of this whole discussion about mental illness or mental health is, okay, if you don't have the biological component, then what could it be? Well, maybe it's in the second area, your biology, which you're talking about. We have 100 billion neurotransmitters in the brain.
Yeah.
100 billion. What
Exciting.
happens when those neurotransmitters don't send the right messages and are not connecting because of lack of exercise, lack of proper nutrition, lack of water, lack of vitamins, all of the
Yeah.
things that you do in your assessment process as a physician, as a holistic physician, to take a look and help people get balanced, right? Because if our neurotransmitters are not working correctly in the brain, then no matter what we do with our bodies, that swimming pool is gonna not fill up, right?
Yeah.
So our biology is a piece of it. Certainly, our genetics may or may not be a piece of it. And the third piece that particularly I see in my field is psychological trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? That 95% of the females in my intensive outpatient program have been sexually abused from age 2 to 5.
Mm.
Well, that kind of psychological trauma, you're not going to get over.
Right.
You're going to manage and learn coping skills and learn to get through it. But it's that kind of psychological trauma that people are just not able to get over. And as you know, our brain records every experience, right?
Yeah.
So when we get to experience close to that, our brain re-traumatizes ourselves. And so that's the kinds of coping skills that we're learning to deal with those kinds of traumas.
Okay. So coping skills with those kind of traumas, and I
Yep.
want to focus on that, because there are a lot of my patients that have dealt with massive traumas.
Right.
And I was actually just teaching at Vacation Bible School, and there was a little girl there that had just recently been adopted and was dealing with some traumas. I knew she was acting out differently than
Yeah.
just like any other kid kind of acting out. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? When I learned from the mom, and that she was recently adopted and all that was going on, I thought, wow, okay, that makes sense. How can I understand her better? How can I communicate
Mhm.
differently? And so what are some of your coping skilled techniques that maybe someone listening could say, yeah, you know what? He's talking about me. That's me, that had that happen years ago, and I'm still not over it. And I get triggered, and
Yeah.
maybe just one or two like coping skills that maybe they could apply to their own life.
Yeah. Well, I have a very simple plan that I use for every patient, and the reason I use a very simple plan is because I'm a very simple person, and so simple things make things work for me, right? So I use the word person, Person,
As an
and I
acronym?
say an acronym. And
Mm,
I say that in your journal, in your daily journal, write the word person. And we're going to have one small, and I use this terminology very specific, small but reasonable goal in each one of these 4 areas, so you can see that you're accomplishing something. You can see you're moving ahead. P stands for physical, which is one of your whole wheelhouses,
Wow.
right? Is to
Yeah.
work through physical. And
So like go for a walk,
yeah, yeah.
something.
And we have seen incredible studies in depression that talk about dehydration,
Oh yeah.
right? And that we have a lack of water in our system. And we're constantly diffusing that water through caffeine and through chocolate and through all of the pieces of our life, right, that we normally take for granted. And vitamins, I use a 3-step vitamin process to help people take a look at that. Of course, that's your expertise too, is to work through people in terms of their vitamins. Exercise, but I talk about very simple things people do. I say, for example, are you driving? Are you going shopping today? Well, sure. Well, listen, when you get to the parking lot of that big box store, don't park close to the entrance. Park far away and walk, and that starts your exercise program.
That's right. I love it.
Right?
Yes.
Small but reasonable
Doable.
change, right?
Hmm.
Because if we try to do, I mean, in your 5-step process or your 7-step process that you have people go through, you don't tell them, okay, you're going to lose 50 pounds in 3 weeks.
No.
It's just not going to happen, right? Because people are going to fail,
Right. Right.
and we want them to be
To
successful,
succeed. Yep.
right?
For
So
sure.
physical is one. That's P. E is emotional, and I talk about the fact that life is obviously difficult. Life, things are not fun anymore. Like before you were depressed or before you were anxious. So I talk about the great psychological principle, which is whatever you used to do that worked, do more of it.
Yeah. And
Right?
what
I
do you
mean,
find that is there like a common thing that people like to do that seems to get them on that off that or emotional roller coaster?
yes. And that is doing things for other people,
Oh, that's good.
which is
Serving.
the R part, relational. And
Yeah.
so I will have them make a list of people that they haven't that they've started to isolate themselves from. And I'll
Mm.
say, okay, does that person need an email from you? Does that person need a phone call? Does that person need just a word of encouragement? Because there's something in us that, again, we talked about community, that God wants us to reach out to other people. And when you're reaching out to other people, you start to decrease your own selfishness.
So good. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
So P is person, E is emotional, R is relational, and S is spiritual. And so I find where I do a spiritual assessment with people, and I try to find where they're at in their spiritual life. And obviously, some people come with no spiritual life, or they've been burnt in church.
Mm.
And right. And so they
Church
say,
hurt.
well, I don't want to go to church. And I say, okay, well, what can you do? And so they say, well, I don't believe most of the Bible. And I say, okay, just read the words of Jesus. Why don't you just start with the words of Jesus? Right.
Yeah. Nice
So,
and simple.
because we want to move people forward in small but reasonable change.
Yes.
So it's a very
Some
simple plan that I use, and then we go from there. But if people can't do the basics, for example, medications or vitamins or being able to be mindful or meditations or prayer, you gotta work with people in the basics.
yeah.
Um,
Do you find that some of your patients, I mean, you gotta have the want to, right?
yeah,
In order to get healed
sure.
and better. So, do you find that there's some of your patients that you need to kind of fire? And I don't mean that in a bad way, but like they don't have the want to, like they're just not going to do it? Or do you find that everyone succeeds, they do something, and you keep them accountable in such a way that they're able to feel like they're making progress or that they are making progress?
I wish that everyone would just see how brilliant I am as a therapist and would just be perfect and do everything I ask
I
them to
hear
do,
you. I hear you on that.
particularly with marriage couples. And
Mm,
I've seen a bunch of marriage couples in my career, and I will give simple homework, and I will say, okay, can you do this? And if they agree to do it and then don't do it, then I will say, okay, then you need to go see somebody else because I don't want to take your money and waste your time. And so,
Yeah.
yes, I will fire people. And I find people will come back to me. And I'm just in a unique situation where God has blessed me where I don't have to have patients. I'm not dependent on people that I certainly can work with people in the way that I believe God intends for me to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's the best way. Um, that's the best way to do it. Flow through however God's leading you. That was kind of a random kind of question, but I was just curious because sometimes people just don't want to,
They
or they're
don't.
not willing. And if they're
That's right.
not willing, then we as practitioners cannot help. So there's got to be that willingness and being ready to take steps necessary to get healthy and healed. Um, would you say that all mental health, I mean, I'm gonna say all. All is a pretty big statement, but all mental health, illnesses are treatable?
Yes, I do.
Good
Because
answer. I
if
do too.
because if we don't have hope, how in the world can we expect our patients to have hope?
Yeah, that's good. That's
Right?
good.
And so, and I know you do that in your own practice. I know that your expectation is that everyone get better. Otherwise, but sometimes you're the only person in the room that expects that, right? And but if you don't have hope, then your patient certainly can't.
That's it. That's it. That's so good. I thought I'd throw in a little scripture verse here because this is one I share with my patients often, but it's 2 Timothy 1:7, right? And it's for God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and sound mind. And so when we know this and we start operating with that authority and that knowingness that we do have a sound mind and we do have the power, and fear does not, keep us oppressed, then we start to move in that direction, right? And it's just kind of
Right.
sometimes getting our mind on the truth of what of who God says that we are too, right? Sometimes people forget, especially with mental illness, they forget who they are in Christ.
That's right. That's right. And Jesus said, "These things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have much,
Trouble.
much problems, but take courage, for I've overcome the world." And
Yeah.
that's why I use that small but reasonable change, because I think once we get people moving forward and they start to have some success and they start to see some changes in their mind, in their body, in their spirit, then they start to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
Um, the other question I get about mental illness is, what about sin?
Mm,
And I'm sure in your practice you've heard that too,
yeah.
about what about sin? And the way I talk about that is, because people say, well, all isn't all mental illness sin?
Mm,
And I say, no, um, all sin can lead to mental illness.
yeah.
But because we're all sinners and we all sin, we all don't have mental illness.
Yeah.
And those in and folks in the church who don't understand depression and anxiety and bipolar tend to use those words of those disorders, and
They can be hurtful.
they don't know what they're talking about. For
Yeah.
example, people say, "Well, I woke up today, I was so depressed." No, you weren't depressed, you were sad. And sadness is not depression. It's a part of depression, but it's not the disorder of depression. Or I'm so anxious today. No, you're not. Anxiety is a disorder. You had worrisome thoughts today. So people think they know what mental illness is, or they think they know what depression or what anxiety is. They don't. But in our terminology and in our culture, we use, unfortunately, those terms interchangeable.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I mean the power of words, right? Life and death is in the power of the tongue. And so
Yeah,
as you're speaking those things
yeah,
over yourself, it could continually evolve down that road. So be aware of what you're speaking out and what you're saying that you have as far as labeling yourself. Now, I want to talk about quickly just the culture that we're in, the digital era with
hmm
all the social media.
Yeah.
And I think I've asked most of my experts that I've had on the show that have been talking about mental health, do you believe that social media has played a role in the mental health situation that we're in today?
Of course.
Yeah.
I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, when you're constantly filling your head
Yeah.
with all of the things that you can find on social media, and literally when you're 2 clicks away from pornography,
Right.
that kind of thing didn't happen when I grew up. We didn't have those kind access to those kinds of things, and now you can be a 5-year old child and you can have access to pornography. Well,
Right.
all of those kinds and violence
Yeah.
and all the video games that are violent and car wrecks and just all of the things that you can see are going to fill your mind because, as we said before, your brain records every experience.
Just like a scary movie or something. Your brain
Right.
doesn't always understand reality from just a movie, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's still responding with that adrenaline and in the same kind of way, social media does that to people as well.
Right, and when you're under 16, 18 years old, you don't even have the cognitive ability yet
Right.
to be able to make those kinds of distinctions. And now in our society, as you know, the difference between right and wrong is you get caught. Right is you didn't get caught. So, I mean, there's just once
Or whatever your truth is, Alan, and I've got my truth, then that makes it right. Yeah.
moral therapeutic deism, which is do good to feel good, and then I am good. And so that we've become our own God. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. Well, we've heard that one before. How did that go?
Not so great. Not so great.
That's
And it's just interesting as we see it all around us and what's going on. It's like I mean, like, wake up. I just want to shake some shoulders and say, wake up, people. And even sometimes myself, if I'm getting sucked in, because all of us are human, right?
right.
And so it's like, okay, whoa, I'm spending way too much time on this or whatever. And I don't want anything to be my God other than God Himself.
Yes.
So it's easy to get sucked in and get into the trap. And so I don't blame anyone for any of it, but it's like let's open our eyes and recognize the reality of what is happening and break away, break free of the strongholds.
That's right. And, I mean, we just have access to so much
Yeah.
different medias that take our attention. And one of the challenges that I have with patients is I say, okay, I just want you to spend 15 minutes in silence today. And people are like, well, I need to look at my phone
That freaks them
or
out.
what in the world are you talking about spending 15 minutes in silence? I don't have 15 minutes to waste. And then I have people take a look at their day. I do a daily journal where I have them track their time, and
I
people
do
are
that too.
amazed. Yeah, amazed at how much time that they waste or they spend on different things.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. No, it's so true. We do have time for what can help us and we just have to realize that we might be addicted to some other things, but it's not helping our mental health. And
That's
so in the church, I think I heard too that one in every five people
right.
over the age of 18 are dealing with mental health issues.
Hmm.
So it's quite a few, whether it's depression or OCD or ADHD or whatever label we want to put on it, schizophrenia. There's all kinds of different levels of it. So since you've done a lot with marriage counseling and marriage
Uh-huh.
therapy, let's talk about that a little bit
Okay.
because sometimes you might not realize that the person you're maybe dating or maybe the person that you've married has a mental health issue until later in the game. And with that said, how do you maneuver through that?
Well, that's obviously a difficult question,
It is. Depends on
because
the
yeah, and but this might be one of the time when using media is a good idea by checking their Facebook or their Instagram or what are they
look for some
saying?
red flags.
Right, for some red flags. So yes, I would check their social media. Secondly, I would check how they treat their family,
Mm, so
because
true.
that can be a tremendous positive or a tremendous negative depending on how people interact with their family. And
Mm,
the third of all, I would want to know what's their support group systems. Who are they going to church? Are they in interactive? Are they involved in missions? I would say, if you're seriously, and when we do premarital counseling, I'll say one of the things you need to do is you need to ask them the last time they filed their tax return and look at their tax return.
that's
I'm
brilliant.
It's
Yeah.
incredible how many
Yeah.
people have not filed their tax return or behind on their taxes, and people find out later, when they marry them and they go to apply for a house. Uh-oh, we're in debt.
No, that's bad. That's bad. You want to catch that early on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there are all kinds of red flags that we need to pay attention to that we don't when we're in love. When our
Mm,
neurotransmitters are firing, those 100 billion neurotransmitters are firing, and we're in love, that we don't take the time to be rational. So I always say you need to have an accountability partner.
for sure.
Accountability partner outside of the person you're going to marry, and somebody who will be appropriately critical,
It's
and
good.
somebody who you can listen to, who will give you good advice.
Yes, you don't want the friend or whatever that just says, "I just want you to be happy, whatever you wanna do." Nope, that's
No.
not the right friend
Or
for
you can
accountability.
bring them in and we'll do a psychological evaluation and tell
I
you
think
what's
that's
going
a
on.
great idea. All right, and Alan, do you, work with people online? Because 'Cause you're in Oklahoma and my, listeners are all over, so I'm just curious.
Right, right, right. I do some Zoom with
Okay.
people
Okay,
online.
good, good.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to ask that because I'm sure
Sure.
someone listening is like, "Gosh, I'd really like to get in touch with Dr. Gates and see
Sure.
how he could assist us." And so what's the best way of finding you? And I know you've written a couple books, but what's the best, website for you?
Probably through my email. And I pride myself in actually answering emails, which takes some time, but at least I stay off Facebook. I mean,
Right, that's
yeah.
good, that's good.
So I'm not, and you have my email, and do you mind just posting it to?
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes, no
Good,
problem.
good.
Yeah, yeah, so anyone listening, if you're
Yeah,
interested in meeting with, Dr. Gates, check out my show notes, and I'll have his email address in there, but I really appreciate you, I appreciate your passion for helping people, especially in the church, really understand about mental health and wanting, the stigma to not be such a dramatic, thing, that we
hmm,
can go and help our brothers and sisters and help them become restored and healed and love on them and not isolate them. So thank you for being a leader in that.
thank you for spending time with me today.
Yeah. All right. God bless you. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this episode of the Visibly Fit podcast. And if you are looking to get in touch with Dr. Gates, that email will be in the show notes, but I'm going to share it here as well. It's jagates1955 at gmail.com. So if you are looking for someone to assist you, then give him an email. He's all about communicating through email. So that's super cool. Old school. I love that. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, if it blessed you, please share it with others. If you're looking for a health and wellness program, a holistic approach to your mental health and your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, go to getvisiblyfit.com and let's work together. Let's get you on to my 7-week accelerator program. And I promise we get you in the right headspace, but also with the right eating, movement, sleep patterns, making sure you're supplemented in all the right ways and beyond, and making sure we're reducing stress and all kinds of things. But the holistic approach, that's where it's at. So make sure you go to getvisiblyfit.com. Let's get you started today. Or if you just have a question and want to ask me first before you do, you can email me at Wendie@wendiepett.com, and then we can communicate that way. All right. As always, I love spending this time with you. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next time right here on Visibly Fit. Take care. Well, that's a wrap for today's show. So thank you so much for tuning in. I love spending this time with you. To learn more and get more free resources, just head on over to wendiepett.com. And thank you in advance for sharing this episode and this podcast, following and subscribing not only to this podcast, but finding me on social media, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are, I'm probably there too. Until next week and our next podcast time together, make it a visibly fit day.